making art as well as looking at art is important to me because it gives me a visual world that is infinite in its variety. I think that great art is such a pleasure to look at simply because it is great art. And it's great art because so often it is beautifully designed, beautifully executed, beautifully stated.
Putting this show together, I really wanted to emphasize both the range of forms found in Fred's work and also how those forms are translated into different media. So an example of this is if you look at the segment pairings along the long haul portion of the gallery, you see three-dimensional wooden constructions, colored gouache paintings on paper, and very carefully rendered black and white ink drawings. Here you can see how your perception of a singular form is altered in surprising ways through different media. In this grouping of 25 segments, you can really see how Lynch has adapted his language of painting into what he calls these three-dimensional assertions. Great attention is paid to crafting each object, to layering paint, sanding away, and incising lines to create variations in surface treatments. The large-scale division paintings are where this series has all started. For the division paintings, Lynch uses a method of dividing the picture plane into an approximate 120-degree angle. The key word here is approximate, because although he applies a system to his painting, nothing is measured or exact, and it's very important that the system not be too rigid, so as to leave room for the piece to develop organically. From the initial 120-degree line, Lynch further divides the picture plane into smaller and smaller variations, each layered with varying degrees of color, line, and mark making.
A lot of artists find a niche somewhere, or a way of doing things, or a sort of style. Can be a fairly broad thing or fairly narrow thing. And it's successful, and they stick with it, and they get known for that. And one of the things I admire about Fred is that he's constantly sort of redoing that, rethinking that sort of thing, and starting all over again. If I have a show of his work every 2 years, which I have generally done, I can count on it being a recognizable show of Fred Lynch's work, but it'll always be something different from the show we had before. This piece might be a good example to talk about the sort of variety and breadth of his interests. It's a freestanding piece. This probably evolved from a body of work he began 3 or 4 years ago, in which these were wall pieces. So that's a kind of change, but the wall pieces in turn came from some drawings and some paintings he was doing at the time, so that it went from a two-dimensional painted or drawn piece to a three-dimensional wall piece, and then a three-dimensional freestanding piece. And most recently, or at least more recently even than this, he's taken to making perfectly scaled pen and ink drawings of these same pieces. So he's, in a way, he's come full circle.
He's very disciplined, gets in the studio early, and just gets a lot done. The ideas just keep coming, and I guess that's what it's a constant surprise to see what the newest body of work is and how it progresses.
I graduated in 1962. At the time, I was involved in abstraction because everyone else was. But because everyone else was, I quickly changed to figurative painting. Not necessarily painting that was about portraiture or personality, but just about figures in space. This is a good example of what I've been doing lately, what's been on my mind lately, which is another variation, another version, or another form of expressing something that I called segments. And then the segments themselves, this is a good example of a piece that I've called segments. And this is essentially a three-dimensional or a semi-three-dimensional relief sculpture that's based on some of the shapes that I found in a series that has absorbed me for maybe 10 years now, which I call divisions. There's a certain amount of tedium involved in this, but I've sort of gotten used to the idea of repetition as a kind of, I don't know, stimulus almost to doing these things. It has to do, I guess, with seeing something slowly developed. I've often tried to do these kinds of things with a system that I use, which is to do just a little bit of everything and then go back and do a little bit more of everything. And this way the whole image starts to develop without me having to worry about finishing one corner and then looking up and saying, oh my goodness, I've got to do that same thing all over here too. That kind of cuts in on the enthusiasm of working this way. So I have had to work out systems that keep me interested and keep my strength up too, even, I suppose. So now I'm just cleaning up some of these lines. I'll re-ink it. And by re-inking, I mean that I will spread ink all over this, oil paint usually, or sometimes enamel, and then rub it thoroughly in, and then wipe it down clean. As I say, much like an etching. An etching is the same process in that you scratch or induce a line in a plate, then you thoroughly cover it with ink and rub in ink into the lines, and then with etching, just like here, you have to rub it all off. The basic process, as I mentioned earlier, was to apply some ink or paint, in this case oil paint, just simply drop it right on this surface, and then sometimes with a little oil like this, but I think in this case we'll keep it drier, to simply rub it in, to just simply force it over the original paint that is already in the lines, and then into those lines. It's the same process, I guess, and see what happens. Sometimes this will entirely change the color because the earlier color was still in the process of drying, and other times when it's really thoroughly dry, then this simply will optically, visually mix with it and change it into a third color. It's all not necessarily haphazard, but it is certainly experimental, and it certainly tends to invite accidents that are happy accidents, things that you would never find if you didn't actually take that chance. I'm not a real fan of pure accident. I think that if you have something in your mind's eye that you want, you should pursue that and not really get too distracted by lots of accidents. But I think you have to find a balance between these so that you can get something that is aesthetically pleasing to you and at the same time unexpected. It's about, I guess, discovery, but it's a kind of indulgence too. It's not a kind of discovery that's going to save the world or is going to cure cancer or anything like that. It's more a discovery that there is infinite variety in the world, and the more we can enjoy seeing variety, the more we should try to produce, I guess. That's what I've been absorbed with for the last probably 8 or 9 years, this idea of division, and then the infinite variety, not just of shapes, but also of ways that you can divide. One obviously would be if you can imagine this as a straight line, that as a straight line, that as a straight line, and then doing the same thing with this. when you curve it, you get another kind of variation on dividing, and any kind of variation, I think, on ways in which you can examine something by dividing it and redividing it. So I think those are interesting things. The bonus for me has always been, at certain points, we get these interesting shapes. Here, a relatively straight line, because the curve is so short that you hardly see it, and then this kind of shape here. That kind of shape there may not be of interest to people who are looking for recognizable forms, you know, but as a sort of composition of 4 different lengths, 4 different attitudes, 4 different ways that this tends to get along with each other, I think that's an interesting thing. And when you can then take this and extrapolate it, take it out, and then make something just of that, and that's what I did with the segments and with the other variations and other media, that's, to me, is interesting, and even more important, perhaps, it's enjoyable. I think that the best art is the art that doesn't necessarily mean too much of one particular thing, that isn't something that has to be interpreted in very narrow, limited grounds. Perhaps that's why I'm an abstract painter or an abstract artist, because to me abstraction allows so much more freedom than, say, more specific representational kinds of art forms. Philosophy has always been that there's always one missing. There's always one left over that isn't done quite right.